Before I give the mic over to Howard, I've known Howard for several decades, so I want to add to that. I want to go back to what Elder Henry said about stories. We all have stories, and those stories are valuable. We should be sharing them with each other, our children, our grandchildren, because it provides some direction in their lives and in the lives of this world that continues beyond us. So thank you for that message. Howard has a story to tell you. Howard has a story to tell you about thriving in retirement. And you might ask, if you knew Howard, why an accountant deliver a story on thriving in retirement? Let me give you a few details about Howard. Howard's, first of all, Howard's a good pick because he's an outstanding teacher. Howard is one of the few people across Canada who holds a 3M award, prestigious 3M award. For all the time I've known Howard, Howard's been one of the healthiest and fittest people I know. I aspire, I'm a few years younger, but I aspire to be in the same place Howard is when I reach that age in a few years ahead. Howard is the reigning world squash champion for over 75 and soon to grab that title for the over 80 age group in Amsterdam in a couple of months. And just to back that up a little bit and connect it to one of our speakers today, who's not here, and he's one of my former colleagues in the Department of Kinesiology, Stuart McGill, who's an international back expert. Howard had an incident a couple of decades ago, which almost ended his squash career and his path to remaining so fit. And that was a back injury. And he consulted with Stu, and by following Stu's advice and exercises, Howard returned to the squash courts in an active life in a year or so. So for those of you hearing Stu speak today, he does have a lot of expertise to share on back. The third thing, and what that makes him an excellent person to speak about thriving retirement and give a story, is that Howard's a visionary. I met Howard 25 years ago when he conceived of this idea of establishing an undergraduate graduate programs in entrepreneurship. At that time, I was in the Office of Graduate Studies, Dean of Graduate Studies, and Howard put through a plan to establish the Masters in Business and Entrepreneurship and Technology in less than a year. It went through all committees at the university level and the Ontario College of Graduate Studies. Of course, Howard was on my doorstep every week to push that thing along, and it was well worth it. That's a thriving program and blossomed into the Conrad School of Business. So I'm going to let Howard tell this very visionary story of thriving in retirement. Thank you, Howard.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Well, thank you, Jim, for those very kind remarks. I don't know about you, but I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say here. And Elder, those were very inspiring results, and thank you very much. I love the music as well as we went along. So, listen, you've already been sitting for almost a half an hour listening to things. I want to do a little bit of a technology check as well to make sure that I don't interfere with the microphone, and if I do, I have to move over here for a second. So why don't I just give you 2 or 3 minutes, just stand up and just move your legs, because I want to have your undevoted attention here. So, well, once again, on behalf of all my colleagues at University of Waterloo Retirees Association and CURAC, I'm delighted to have you here in attendance and looking forward to two very inspiring days and informative days with speakers and with folks in the crowd. So welcome again to the University of Waterloo. Our conference, as you know, is entitled Thriving in Retirement, Not Surviving. And in a few minutes, I will try to provide a brief description of just what thriving in retirement means, but perhaps even more importantly, what thriving in retirement means to you personally as we go through this next 45 minutes or an hour together. For the moment, I just thought I'd show you a little bit of data, which I think is illuminating in terms of where we stand in Canada right now. As you know, just recently we passed the 40 million mark in terms of numbers of Canadians. We, as a group, and I'm assuming that's most of us in the room, 65 and over, make up almost 19% of that population. Of more interest, I think, to us in the audience is the next statistic, which is basically showing that if you have made it to 65, your odds of making it a lot further are pretty good. In fact, if you've made it to 65 now, the odds are, as a male, that you'll make it to 19 years or more, females 22. So that's a pretty nice bonus to get to the stage that we're at now. And the other one statistics, and there's thousands of these that I thought was kind of interesting, is the very rapid growth of centenarians that we have in Canada. From 2001 to 2023, we've almost tripled that number as we've gone through. Now, in recent years, this topic of thriving in retirement has become increasingly popular. Part of this is due just to the vast numbers of we retirees that are coming through the system. As I said, almost 19% today, 20% within the next couple of years. We're heading to 25% by mid-century. And another interesting stat is that by the end of this decade, there'll be 5 million more Canadians turning 65 and over. The interest, though, is also due to our generation not only being interested in living longer, but aging more healthily. It seems to be the core. After all, you can't thrive in retirement if you don't live long enough to enjoy it or stay healthy enough to do more than just survive the trip. Do you want to really live longer if our last years aren't going to be healthy ones? According to the UNDP, United Nations Population Division, we're doing pretty well, doing some good things in Canada. Worldwide, the expected longevity is about 71.7. In Canada here, we're 81.3. And again, as the chart shows, if you've made it to 65, we're likely to live considerably longer than that. Currently, we are experiencing much longer and greater longevity. And we also face a lot more illness. Do we, again, want to live longer if we're not feeling better? Let me just give you one last thing on this slide that may be of interest to you in terms of the interest that our generations have in living longer and also living better. Search of Medline. Medline turns out to be the database for the world's peer-reviewed medical literature, shows that since 2010, 14 years ago, there's been more published academic research papers on longevity and health span than had been published in the previous 150 years. It's just how much people are taking this area of longevity and health span to heart. So what do we mean by thriving in retirement? And I know you won't pay attention to me at all when I'm talking unless we identify this guy on the screen. And so this is a fellow that many of you will know. His name is Robert De Niro, who played in this movie called The Intern, all right? And Robert De Niro was a retiree that was a little bored in his life. He wasn't satisfied with what he was doing. He wasn't thriving in retirement, and he came on as the senior intern at Anne Hathaway's company and made enormous contributions. Not just, I mean, he was played the fool at first. People were just tolerating him. As he moved on in the world of work, he was contributing activities that helped the organization, but perhaps more importantly, creating that kind of social connection that so many people were looking for and showing people what empathy can really do. Okay, well, that's the thriving in retirement part of Robert De Niro. Let me just take a second here to go a little further, because there is really no shortage of information in this particular topic that ranges from really very good science to an often disturbing glut of buzzwords that telling people how to thrive. Some of these are based, as I said, on great science, and I'm going to focus on these in a few minutes. But I also find it kind of fun to walk through the aisles in the supermarket stores and see all these wonderful recommendations for how we can live better and longer. You know, for example, you see things such as the value of cold plunges, of intermittent fastings, of red light therapy. All this kind of stuff is interesting. The key here is this is really, really big business worldwide. In North America alone, this health market is a $1.8 trillion retirement market. And it just demonstrates what I think every one of us in this room already knows. People not only want to live a long time, they want to age well as it goes along. Now, as people are living healthier and living longer, we're seeing our traditional retirement model undergoing a big paradigm shift. This is not our parents' retirement. More than ever, people are seeing retirement as a new chapter in our lives, an opportunity for exploration and for growth. Retirement has been reframed a lot from primarily financial considerations to emotional preparedness, with plans, goals, and tactics of how we can transition from our work careers to a career in which we can take advantage and benefit from the new opportunities that are available to us. More and more, I think society are moving to the belief that the greatest wealth is health. And in fact, I think I saw a supermarket bag with that logo right on it the other day. And so we're really moving that way. So how about this as a definition for retirement and thriving in retirement? And I'll focus on this with you a little bit as we go along in the next little while. But I'm going to take a minute, if you don't mind, just to highlight some of the key words that are here. Thriving in retirement, it's a big concept encompassing physical health, emotional well-being, meaningful connections, continued personal growth, and a positive approach to life's changes and challenges. It's about actively changing and shaping one's post-career years to lead a purposeful and meaningful life. Let's work with that as a start. We'll see how this goes as we go through the rest of the next few minutes together. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be simply acting as a guide as we search out some of these strategies and tactics for living longer, but more importantly, living better. I am no expert. I am not a medical doctor. I'm not pushing any one of the things that I will mention to you. I'm simply very much like folks in the room here. I'm interested in this area and looking for ways to myself lead a more active and longer life. And I suspect that will fit with the definition of many of you as well. Now, I'll try to introduce some evidence from good sources that have focused on this particular area, and more specifically, focus on the span and personal fulfillment. This is important, this latter part, because in the last century, we've actually added about 30 more years to the longevity of Canadians, but we haven't done as good a job on the health span. side of the activities. So this is a diagram that I wanted to just show you. I took this out of a journal of physiology that shows a little bit of the longevity, where we are, where we want to be, and the same thing with health span. So if you're looking at I guess on your left, the first line is kind of the status quo, where we have been. We are born, we live, and we get sick, we die. In the last years, we've been able to extend that longevity considerably so that the lifespan that we have is further to the right. But the health span is still showing disease, maybe a little less, but it's still certainly there. The goal of all of this, of course, is that we increase that lifespan, but also keep morbidity down to our final years so that the decades that we have in retirement are healthy ones. The health span on the right side is same thing. It's just taking it a little different direction. Given a constant of longevity, what have we got in health span? We age, we die. And what we're trying to do essentially is make that green line go further out as we can and keep the red line to a minimum. All right, so let me use that as a starting point for a couple of people who have inspired me as they have, in my mind, thrived in retirement. The first one may be a little bit of a surprise to you, depending on your political leanings, okay? Now, I want to use Jean Chrétien, one of our former prime ministers, and I want to start by telling the story that Peter Donalow, who was his director of communications for many years, told the rest of us here. Excuse me. Last week, I phoned my old boss to wish him a Happy New Year. This is in January 2024. Peter, I will call you back in this very raspy voice that you may remember. I'm my trainer. So nothing remarkable about that comment if it hadn't been coming from someone who turned 90 on January 11th of that year. But when Jean Chrétien is roping into his 10th decade in many of the same ways that he passed his first 9 decades. His eyes are straight ahead. He's living in the present. He's focused on the future. Now, our youth may not remember too much about Jean Chrétien, but I suspect that most of us here in the room have not forgotten that he is one of our more extraordinary Canadian stories. He was born the 18th out of 19 children in a small town, Shawinigan Falls, in Quebec. He arrived in Ottawa speaking, well, I couldn't say even a smattering of English because he's the only prime minister who has been, the claim is he's not fluent in either official language. That's how he arrived. And he went on to becoming the longest serving cabinet minister that we've had in Canada and then prime minister. Now, I'm inspired by Chrétien in part because he played a major role in giving Canadians the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which those of you that are following the news these days, and this is really under threat with a number of our politicians trying to invoke the notwithstanding clause. But Chrétien gave us that charter earlier on. You may remember he led Canada away from the precipice of ruin in Iraq when other countries were going in. He stopped us from doing that. Later, a little decade later, he turned our economic ship around with the help of Paul Martin at a time when the Wall Street Journal was dubbing our country to be an honorary member of the third world. Now that's Chrétien's work to help us get around it. And then finally, the Clarity Act in 2000 stemmed the tide of separatism, at least for a while. We're seeing it popping up again in Quebec and places in Alberta. But Chrétien was instrumental in trying to keep us going in one way. He's always had a sense of balance. He stayed grounded. No doubt that's because of his good wife, Aline Chrétien, who Jean Chrétien says has been my rock of Gibraltar for years before she passed away. And most things in his life were in moderation. So Donalow says, Jean, what accounts for your longevity and your healthy way of life? And he comes back and says, here are my tips. I stay moving I stay moving and I'm remaining active. You remember how he always took those 2 stairs? I don't know. Not sure he's doing that anymore, but he's there. I stay connected. I don't micromanage. I stay focused on the big issues. I'm optimistic. I do not fear the future. In fact, I embrace it. And I have lots of fun, which he did as prime minister. It's been 2 decades now since Chrétien left office, but the energy and drive are still there. He may not climb those stairs 2 at a time anymore, but he still goes to his office every day. And every summer he returns to the Région de Normandy in Quebec to meet his family and friends that are there. His belief, his optimism in the future is as strong as ever. Number 1. 2, I'd like to introduce you to a lady called Betty Bruxelles. Betty Bruxelles learned to swim as a teenager in the canals in Amsterdam and didn't become a serious swimmer until she was a citizen of Canada, 68 years old, living in Vancouver. She's a sprightly 100 years old right now, and she is a multiple world record holder. January of this year, Ms. Bruxelles broke records in the 400-meter freestyle, the 50-meter backstroke, and the 50-meter breaststroke at a swim club in Vancouver. In total, in one day, she competed in 5 separate events. Asked, what is it that makes her life fulfilling and long? She says, I'm really very fortunate. Other than wearing a hearing aid, I'm pretty healthy, and I don't take any real deep medications. I walk at a fast pace. I never let anybody help me carry my own bag of gear. I live every day of my life, and I enjoy it. I do have a cell phone, but really it's only for an emergency because all my friends have died. Who am I going to call? All right, so those are 2 of the areas that I just wanted to say are inspired. But the fact is that every one of you in the audience today could point to your own examples of people that have inspired you living well and living longer. They're there not because they're former prime ministers or because they have record holders of any particular kind. They're simply examples of individuals who inspire us along the way. They have a sense of fulfillment. They have a purpose. They see well-being in their post-employment lifestyle taking place. It goes well beyond the idea of merely surviving and encompassing actively engaging in activities, promoting physical health and emotional health. I'll just go a touch further and say, but we often have around us that inspire us. Living in retirement for them is often pursuing activities and interests that bring joy and satisfaction and a sense of purpose to them. They maintain strong social connections in their groups. They engage, again, in regular physical activity. They prioritize their health and their well-being. They continue to learn and to grow. Many of these folks that we recognize and you may think of as I'm saying these words, they contribute to their communities. They pursue passions and hobbies. They cultivate positive outlook. So ultimately, thriving in retirement is about embracing the opportunities that come with this. Okay, but very good. I'm going to get other pains in the asses to work together. So a very good point. And that seems to me to be a wonderful retirement hobby to get that group of people together because in many cases, we are not being listened to. I agree. Other ones. Very good. I want to do everything I did when I was younger, but perhaps at a little slower pace. But you want to have a sense of purpose to be able to move your activities forward. Sure. Yes, ma'am. Wonderful. I want you on my team for sure. I want to continue with my physical health so I'm able to contribute to activities and passions that I'm really interested in. Okay, you're good. Sorry, sir.
want to prevent dementia, I will talk about it on table 17.
Okay, all right. So you're in the round table? Okay.
Have this in your bag.
I do. Okay. So I want to keep my emotional and mental health intact. And you are specifically going to talk about this at table 17 in the round table. Okay, very good. Okay, a couple more and then we'll move on. Okay. All right, okay, I guess so. If you want to just be in control of your own activities without people dictating to you how you should run your own affairs, okay? One last one? Yes, ma'am. I want to follow my dreams. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Okay, excellent. Okay, so first one, I want to follow my dreams and pursue my passions, but also have the younger generation look at you and say, there go I, I'm a role model to follow. Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so I think we've got a kind of a meeting of the minds in some of these. When these questions are asked to folks like ourselves, a lot of what you said are the answers that they bring back. So let me just put up a few here that I will say. These are the things that at the high level, these are the kind of activities, these are the mission statements that I'd like to be able to follow. And you've mentioned a bunch of these, my physical well-being, the pursuit of passions that came through, social connections and engagement, very big one, and I'll refer to this one a little bit later. Continued lifelong learning, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning in my later years, that I'm contributing and people recognize it for what I'm doing. Didn't hear this one, but often people say, I want to travel. I want to explore new areas. Very big one, that's it. Financial security that was mentioned earlier on. The mental and emotional well-being. The ability to adapt, to be willing to embrace change. And there's perhaps just following an attitude of gratitude and being content with where we're at, thinking about the opportunities that lie in front of us. Okay, good start. Should shut this down. I'm gonna need a glass of water here. Thank you. I'm okay. I'm good. Good. I'll recover quickly. Yeah, good. Okay, so how do we achieve these? So I thought we'd just have a little look through the experts saying. In a way, they're much thinking along our particular lines, but they've studied these areas a little bit more. I thought I'd pass on a few of these works of longevity and health span to you. So what do the experts say? I will start with this and say, here's a number of recent books. Thank you very much. I get excited and need water. Yes. So as you look at these books up on the thing here, several are there. I mean, can I just say, any of you read some of these? Are you familiar with a few of them? Okay, so about a third of the audience is there. What I'm going to do is say, I will tell you I've read everyone cover to cover. I certainly have perused all of them, and I've read some of them from cover to cover. They're all really decent books. Some of them are kind of humorous, like this one, Stupid Things I Won't Do When I Get Old. There's the international one with the Swedish connection up here. All of them have interesting things to say, but for pressure of time, I'm really going to focus on a couple. And that is the Blue Zones and Peter Atch's Outlive. And once again, just hands up anybody that are familiar with either one of these two. Okay, again, a smatter. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what's in these. The second thing that I want to just refer you to is the number of publications, podcasts, newsletters that are available on this area of longevity and aging. Now, for those of you who were in the group last night at the Schlegel Center, I'm going to just put a little circle around the research and aging group. Excellent group of specialists, experts who will be in the breakout sessions this morning and this afternoon. So as much as I love this group, I'm not going to refer to their activities as specifically as I might have if we didn't have them in the audience. The one that I think is really good, I shouldn't say really good. I don't want to be first among equals here, but one that I have followed carefully is the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal. For those of you that want to just have an up-to-date look at things, this is an excellent. And I'll refer to this a little bit more in a few moments. However, these other ones are also excellent sources of information. We have RTO here just as a sponsor in the back, Retired Teachers of Ontario, come up with newsletters and publications, excellent materials. We have CARP, which many of you, of course, will be familiar with, Canadian Association of Retired People. We have also the National Institute for Aging, which comes up with periodical reports on areas that affect our particular lives. NORC is something you probably won't say, what the devil does NORC mean? But there's a whole growth activity called Naturally Occurring Retirement Centers. And what are people doing there to make sure that the social connections are strong and these areas that move forward in health span are working? And then, of course, I think for any of you that are subscribers to the Globe and Mail, you will recognize Leslie Beck, who periodically comes up with very interesting and often very well-researched studies to pass on to us. Okay, so I'm going to refer a little bit to these as we begin to move along. So let me perhaps start with this and just say, what do you think these experts claim to be ways to help us thrive in retirement? Now, I won't ask you to pop up here, but this is just the next level down. I want to maintain my physical well-being. That's your objective. How are we going to do that? Well, an easy answer would be to say, I'm going to exercise regularly. Okay? So all we're doing is we're turning that mission idea, I want to be in good physical shape. To do that, I'm going to exercise regularly. So there's going to be an active verb at the beginning of all these things. I will do this, exercise regularly. And in keeping with what you gave back to me a few moments ago, then these are the things that will help us get to the next level. I will actively manage my stress levels. I will try to make strong social connections in the areas that I'm living or the groups that I'm working with. I will try to maintain optimism. I'll come back to this one. This is really core, it turns out, in some of the research studies. I will balance my nutrition and so on and so forth. These are sort of the action verbs at the next step. Okay, so let's now go to these ones that I said I would focus on a little bit more. The blue zones, the outlive, and the McMaster portal, and maybe through questions or others, we'll do a little bit more as we go through this. Okay, so let's start with the blue zones. The concept of the blue zones actually resulted from some demographic work back in 2004 by Michel Poulain and his colleagues. But for those of you that have followed, you'll realize the concept really took off and became public with the publication of the Blue Zone book that you see up here. But also, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix series on the Blue Zones, a 6-episode series, really quite informative along the way. And then there's been videos that have come out on this. So the idea here is Dan Buettner, who you see on the screen, he was a professional cyclist, cycled all around the world. And as he was cycling around the world, he began to notice certain communities that he was going by had this very seemingly longer lifestyle. People living into their hundreds. And not only just living to their hundreds, but they're being healthy in their hundreds. So what he did as he went through this kind of thing is he thought about this, began to put it into some kind of format to publish, and basically said, okay, what are these blue zones that we're going to take a look at? And then we're going to take a look at Peter Attia. As we go through, we're going to do the McMaster portal. So let me just come back here and start over, okay? So with the blue zones, we found 5 of these zones around the world. And if I simply go from the west, Loma Linda in the US, the Nicoya Peninsula, which is in Costa Rica. If we go over a little bit further, we have got Icaria in Greece, we have Sardinia in Italy, and we have Okinawa in Japan. Gardner actually made the claim in his book that in these regions of the world, people are not only living exceptionally long lives, they are 10 times more likely to live to 100 than the rest of the population. A bit observational, I'm not sure how strong that is, but that was it. And what he said is, as I look around these places, there are some core things that all of these 5 zones seem to have in common. For the most part, they seem to be focused more on plant-based diets. We'll express that a little bit more later. A very active lifestyle. They're constantly moving in areas because in many of these cases here, they have they're not well-off areas. There's not a lot of automobiles, so there's a lot of mobility by foot. And strong social connections in the communities that exist. Ability to reduce stress because around the fireside or in the community areas, there's a lot of greeting meetings, empathetic relationships taking place. And I want to just focus a little bit on the last one because it's a little different. Buettner says, you may think this is not because of what's happening in these zones, it's due to genetics. There's a genetic predisposition to live longer. And you won't dispute that perhaps some of that is there. But it'll also come back and say, no, this is much more due to lifestyle. And he quotes a number of Swedish studies of twins that have been followed over numerous years, in which one twin seems to be following a blue zone type of lifestyle versus the other twin, which would be more perhaps our lifestyle, and found that once again, the twin that was following the blue zone style of life was living significantly longer and healthier than the other twin who was following a different pattern of life. So that's where this one begins. And I will just say a couple of things about this. The concept of blue zones and this exceptional longevity, for those of you that are sort of academic staff in the audience, this has been challenged by others because of the absence of scientific proof. And there also has been a substantial decline in life expectancy, for example, in Okinawa. And the reason for that is, as he published these areas of blue zones, tourists flock to these areas, and Okinawa was one of the first ones. And so what happens? McDonald's and Burger Kings follow, and the structure of the town changes, and all of a sudden, the life longevity begins to drop. So there's a, but to his credit, he said there are other communities that are popping up. And one of these is in Singapore, and another one in the province of Alberta, in a town called Airdrie, is a community that is now being viewed as being one of our potential blue zones. Anyway, for me, all of this was initially very observational, interesting, but perhaps lacking in the proof that I personally would have liked to have seen to make it a stronger book. It's also, for those of you that follow, you'll see the real marketing play right now, as many of these US initiatives tend to be. We now have Blue Zone recipes. There's Blue Zone speakers at a huge price if you want to get one. We tried. We have Blue Zone clothes, we have Blue Zone calendars, all this kind of stuff is there. But put that aside, and I will give the Blue Zone group a little bit of credit because they've now really gone into more of a precision wellness market with the opening of a new area in Miami. Good, solid research is coming out of this, and they're continuing publications. And the publications, in this one, you'll see, if you just look this up, you'll see all this, the power of 9. These are pieces of advice for people who want to fall into this particular category. And some of these, again, I'll mention in a few minutes. Okay, so the conclusion on this before I move to the next one, which is quite different, is I think the following. Buettner says it's not so much individuals, lifestyle choices and habits that account for their long, healthy lives. Not so much what they're choosing, in other words, individuals are choosing, but rather it's the lifestyles and choices imposed by the environment and culture in which they are living. So it's a little different than being actively doing all this or simply being in a community where those conditions exist and, hey, you benefit from it along the way, which is kind of an interesting observation. Buechner's role with the blue zones, what he tries to get communities to do is to try to replicate what's happening in some of these blue zone areas, and communities are following it. A small town in Minnesota has agreed to be a blue zone community and follow it. And we see little areas, maybe not cities or communities, but pockets of interest where folks get together and say, could we be a blue zone? All right, so that's where we are with blue zone. So basically it leads him to try to support and reshape what's happening in a specific community. All right, let me take the next one here, if I can, which is Peter Attia's book on Outlive. I'll say a couple of things on this. First of all, he takes a very different approach. And the background for Attia is he's a cancer surgeon who, with the current medical system, asked him to reflect on what medicine was doing and come up with what he feels is a fresh approach and a different mindset to keep us healthier for a longer period of time. This book, to me, is really good because more than others, it's based on science, it's based on evidence. It's readable, it's very convincing, at least from my point of view, and it tells the tale not only from Peter Attia, the physician, and the writer of books, but also Peter Attia, the patient, who, as he was looking at this, realized, holy cow, I'm not going down the right path. I'm doing a lot of things that are going to terminate my life earlier than it should. So he does this, and to me, Outlive simply rises above some of the other books that I had on that list. It's also nice to know that Attia is a Canadian. He's born and raised in Toronto. He did his undergraduate degree here in Canada before going off to Stanford University and picking up his medical qualifications and getting heavily involved in this health span area. Okay, so Attia, what I like to point out here, he's concerned with longevity, but he's far more concerned, not for its own sake, but for the health span. Now, perhaps you may remember this mythical Greek fellow called Tithonus. I put a little picture up here of Tithonus. So what Tithonus did is he asked the gods to give him eternal life. And to his joy, the gods granted him his wish, but because he forgot to ask for eternal health, his body continued to decay. Oops, okay, that's a bit of a mistake on Tithonus's part. So Attia's thing is, the first thing is how long we live, but let's really focus on how well we live, the quality of years or the health span. Now, I think most of us here today, we get this, okay? We get this idea. We don't want to live longer if it means lingering in a state of declining health. Many of us here, I'm sure, have watched our own parents and our own grandparents endure these kinds of fates, still alive, but crippled by frailties or even dementia. Here's where Attia steps in, and this part I like. The past need not dictate your future. Our longevity is far more malleable than we currently believe. His quest then is to improve our health span by reducing the possibility of contracting what he calls one of the four horsemen. The four horsemen are heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, and metabolic dysfunction. Neurodegenerative, Parkinson's, Huntington's, ALS, and when we think of metabolic dysfunction, he's talking increased blood pressure, blood sugar, high cholesterol. So those are the four horsemen. So heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative, metabolic dysfunctions. He's really in the business of trying to reduce this. So his quest is to try to move medicine from the job of stopping the patient from dying and often coming in too late when the disease has progressed to the point where you can't do very much, and stepping in sooner to stop these four horsemen in their track, preventing them altogether if possible. So he's really keen on prevention, but the message to us is more than prevention. It has to go beyond that to us being proactive in the choices that we make to try to keep that health span going further. So if we look at that chart, what he's really saying is that where we have the 100% when we were born and we die down at the bottom, that first line is no intervention. What he calls medical practice 2.0 is increasing the longevity, but not doing much to improve the health span. Increasing longevity because we have treatments, drugs, operations that will allow us to live longer, not necessarily better. His whole focus in the Outlive book is to take us up to that third line on the right-hand side to keep us healthy, keep those four horsemen at bay, and then he's calling that Med 3.0, a longer life and a healthier life along the way. Now, he's got a couple of these little catchphrases, and I'll pass one to you that I particularly like. He calls a scenario in which we live longer and better a bonus decade. I really like this, a bonus decade. We outlive our life expectancy. We also exceed society's, as a comment was made earlier, society's expectations of what our life is supposed to look like to them. Instead of a lousy, marginal decade, we get to enjoy what feels like a bonus decade. This is our objective, okay? To delay death, to get the most out of our extra years. Finally, I'll just leave off with Peter here. He has this expression that he gives to the medical audiences that he deals with. You guys are all in medicine 2.0. There comes a time when we have to stop pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they are falling in. That's what the book Outlive does. I recommend it. It's a very good summary of what we're talking about today. Okay, now let me just go on one more. I think there was one last thing I wanted to do here, which I'll pick up a little bit later, but let's just go on here. McMaster portal. I won't say too much on this because there's such a wealth of information that exists in this portal. But there's a lot of these very friendly blog posts that comes out about once a week. There was another one out this morning. And just as an interest to you, perhaps, here are some of the topics that they have had in the last few weeks, some of which may not interest you at all, some of which will, but they've just got a library and a bibliography of all kinds of things that affect us as retirees hoping to live longer and live better. Beyond longevity, indicators of successful aging, genetics and dementia. What are the connections between the two? Techniques for stretching away the pain. What is stroke? Reducing the risk of skin cancer, and so on. A very good portal, and it's easy to access, and it's very informative along the way. Okay, so let's now just go one more drill here. These were the things that we said were our second level, our action-oriented items, starting with an action verb, exercise regularly, manage stress, and so on. We can't do all of those. We've only got a few minutes left here. So let's sort of focus on a few of these. I'll call these Howard's main interests. You may have other ones here as well, for which there's a great deal of information as well. But I've chosen these for a particular reason. So I'm going to focus on the ones exercise. What can we do here? What about strong social connections? What about nutrition? What do these authors, these experts, tell us a little bit about these particular areas? So let me start with the exercise regularly and a quote that comes from Stuart Phillips of McMaster. I thought it was quite informative. I'll just read it with you if you don't mind. Imagine a pill that reduced the risk and improved prognosis for all known chronic diseases, regardless of current risk, race, gender, or age. We don't need to test this pill, as a large body of data has shown its effectiveness. Other beneficial side effects to this pill include reduced anxiety, depression, and improved sleep. Such a pill would be the world's most widely prescribed medication, and Stuart says, sadly, there is no such pill. But then it goes on, says, however, all of these benefits come with greater participation in physical activity and exercise. And in the dialogue that he does, I'll just simply point out, he's not talking about running marathons. He's not talking about pressing hundreds of weights. He's simply talking moderate exercise, and not even all that often, but moderate exercise. And we'll say what some of those examples are in a minute, really help in this area of longevity and health span. And we see other evidence of this. Peter Acha in his book basically comes up with the same thing in different words. This is the far most potent longevity drug. No other intervention does as much to prolong our lifespan and preserve our cognitive and physical function. People just don't do nearly enough. Now, that's probably not us. We're in good shape, but this is Acha's comments. He's got a few suggestions here, and I just want to highlight what he says. Prioritizing regular exercise is really helpful in our quest to do what we're talking about here. He mentions including aerobic activities, and I'm sure all of you recognize aerobic activities are simply activities that we do that consume oxygen. Light walking, if we can, maybe going a little further, climbing, cycling, those kinds of activities. The strength training, again, very minimal, but this is just very light barbells, perhaps, maybe doing a couple of planks, a couple of push-ups, but it's very, very moderate what he is saying. The third one I want to point out, though, is he's saying this will help us with our agility. And agility is turning out to be just one huge issue here in Canada. A third of all seniors experience a fall once a year. Half again that number will fall again the next year. Falls are the leading causes of hospitalizations as a result of injuries of people over 65. And honestly, as we know, that can well signal the end of folks' independence. Yeah. You may have read the Globe and Mail just last Monday. Andre Picard had a really interesting op-ed that's interesting here. And so he's talking about this study that was citing its own research, said that the conclusion was that a broken hip for people over 65 is more deadly than cancer. Nice thing is that he is providing a list of suggestions for how we can avoid getting into that position. First and foremost in that list of suggestions is saying a little bit of exercise makes an enormous difference in keeping people more steady and sturdy on their feet. So interesting lessons along the way, but this agility is becoming a big issue. And if we can avoid it through physical exercise, let's try to do it. Okay, I'll just do a couple of other quick things. Other evidence on the value of exercise in the blue zones, we see this a lot. For those of you that may have seen the papers, there's this wonderful picture of this fellow riding a horse. He's the guy in Nicoya in Costa Rica, 101 years old, rides a horse 6-7 hours a day. Healthy as a horse, I guess. And once again, they're running the dangers that people in the States and Canada as well are flocking to Costa Rica to see this blue zone community. Who knows how long it's going to last, but it's a big deal. And the Power of Nine talks about the value of moderate exercise. I refer you to the Canadian 24-hour movement guidelines, excellent information and advice for people. The Globe and Mail, some of you may have seen, there was a recent wonderful article that said, for people over 80, what are you doing to keep healthy and staying longer as you go through life? And in almost every single case, they mentioned the value of the exercise they were doing. And honestly, it was not heavy duty exercise. Just once a day, getting out, walking around, moderate exercise, huge benefits to their lifestyle, and so many more. Okay, so first among equals was my exercise here. What benefits of even moderate exercise would do, lowering the risk of the four horsemen coming at us sooner than we want, improve bone health and so on, which would be improving our agility to help us not to fall. What do we do here? Well, just basically find some activity that you like to do, as I suspect many of you are already doing. Minutes count. When you're walking, see if the next day you can increase that by 5 or 10 minutes. Look for groups or classes of individuals that have like-minded interests that you have as well. Take stairs wherever possible. One of the Blue Zone's recommendations or observations was that there's a high correlation between people who are walking up hills on a daily basis and their longevity and health span. Consider just doing very light weights to get that aerobic and sort of that weight training in place. Blue Zones has a nice word for this, which I liked as well. It says, consider exercise snacks. And do an exercise snack. And that just means a little bit of moderate exercise. Okay, so I have to be half an hour? No, I mean, half an hour, I'm done. Okay, I'll go quickly. Okay. Strong social connections. I'll breeze through a few of these things, not because they're unimportant, but I'm just talking too long. Okay. All right, so let's take a quick look at this next one. Again, going back to Atch's work, striving for physical health and longevity is meaningless if we ignore our emotional health. And to nobody's surprise, I think we heard this a little bit earlier. Elder Henry talked about the value of social connections, interactions. All of these help us to remain healthy, engaged, and productive members of society. This is a big issue. Perhaps not so much with our retiree group that we have in the audience, but in Canada as a whole, this is no small problem. 1 in 4 retirees are socially isolated. And what do we mean by socially isolated? We simply mean lack of relationships that we have with others. How do you measure social isolationism? In the research studies that are done, fairly straightforward. 3 questions that they tend to ask. Do you live alone? Are you visited by friends and family, or do you visit your friends and family? And the third one that they often say is, do you belong to a particular sports group, reading group, cooking group? So the answer to those always comes back in the negative side. We have a big problem, and the statistics are telling us then that we have social isolation can increase the risk of dementia, heart disease, and stroke. Peter Lynn, who sometimes many of you may follow on CBC radio. He's that great doctor, and he's just such a warm, empathetic character on CBC. He talked about this social isolationism a little while ago in one of his broadcasts here in town. And he really talked this up, saying you can reduce social isolationism, the risk of death, by almost 36% if you can become more socially connected. Now, I'll just jump to the next one. This is very, very brief, but basically say we're seeing this on our own campuses. And you might as well, if you're staying connected, that our college students, I mean, they may live beside each other, but you see kids that are actually Zooming from one room to the next room when they could walk across the hall 40 feet, 10 feet to talk to their neighbors. We're having a real problem with our own kids, and that's giving rise to a lot of issues that are taking place on our college campuses. Okay, let's just move on then through some suggestions: cultivating friendships, participating community activities, staying connected. And I know I'm talking a little bit to the choir here as well, but I'd just like a couple of these. Say yes to happy hour. In many of the cases, we're being told the best alcohol is no alcohol. And say, oh my God, that's the one joy I have in life. You know? And somebody is saying, oh no, let's take that back a little bit. When you have a drink of wine, don't do it by yourself all the time, but if you have neighbors and friends, this is a way to improve social connectedness. We get a little looser as we drink and imbibe a little bit. It's a wonderful way to move on and improve that social connectedness. Avoid negativity. Another study that came out a little while ago saying, you may see the glass half full, you may see the glass half empty. If you see the glass half full, the likelihood of a longer life and a happier life for you is much enhanced. And this is not Howard saying this. This is the stuff that we're reading in the newspapers. Finally, balanced nutrition. Now, this is the harder one for me because it's so hard to get really good empirical studies on this. Everything is pretty much observational. It's hard to follow a group of people on nutrition over a long number of years. You never know if people are telling you the truth when they say they're eating what they're eating or they're not eating what they're not eating, and the times that they're eating. It's really tough. but there is some common ground in here. And I'll just briefly mention a couple of these. Leslie Beck, again, she's a big proponent of the Mediterranean diet. Although, to be fair, she also gives good write-ups on the European diet, the DASH diet, the Okinawa diet, and there's even a Nordic diet that she talks about. The other day, if you saw her article, she quoted a study that is saying olive oil, which is part of the Mediterranean diet, really good for you. In fact, it's shown to reduce dementia. What do? Take a spoonful of olive oil every day, reduce your dementia. So this is the kind of stuff that you're hearing. All the other authors that I had mentioned earlier in the thing are doing very much the same thing. They're talking about plant-based diets. This is the Blue Zones, the other authors very much on this. And just take a look at some of the things that are there. The polyphenol-rich foods, or will be the blueberries, the raspberries, apples, dark chocolate, black tea, even coffee, pecans, spices. That's the polyphenols that are in there. And I just come to Peter Atcha. Peter Atcha is backing away from a little bit of this, and again for good reason. He just said, I was a big proponent for the keto diet. I was a big proponent for regular fasting. Now I won't touch these diets with a 30-foot pole. So I was wrong. So there is simply no one diet that is going to be prescribed and be the best for each one of us. And he said, let's just talk about common sense. And what he says is the best diet is just eat less. The junk. Consume more protein. And he wants you to consume a lot of protein. I did the calculations. I said, God, I don't know. I can't do that. Consume less alcohol, but he's not saying cut out alcohol. He's very much in keeping with this, meet up at 5 o'clock, have a little drink or two. And I won't say anything, but this glucose monitor is very big on this. For those of you that know about it, it's just a monitor for your blood sugars, and he's very high on this. Right then, Mediterranean diets, avoid ultra-processed foods, get enough protein, the 80% rule, which came from the Blue Zone. When you're eating, and you want to have some more, 80% full, stop. You will be rewarded. I think that makes sense. We all know about it, but few of us may actually follow. And then easy sodium, easy unsaturated fats, and follow grandmother's advice, everything in moderation. That's what we got there. Okay, I've just got a couple of, I'm on my last slide or two, so I'm doing okay. Okay, all right. Okay, so I want to leave off here with a challenge for us, if I can. And I'm going to start off by saying, what we've talked about here today is sort of the big view. What do we want to do to thrive in retirement? How will we do it? What are some of the specific tactics for getting us to achieve these particular accomplishments? Now, I want to take two sides of this. The first one is Colin Milner here, and two people with a lot of credibility, almost as much as you, Stuart. Okay? Colin Milner is the CEO of the International Council of Active Aging and founder of the active aging industry in North America. He's a leading authority on health and well-being in the older adult, been recognized by the World Economic Forum as one of the most innovative and influential minds in the world of aging-related topics. Okay, so got a lot of credibility. This guy says, we know that if you never smoke, you exercise 30 minutes a day, you have a normal body mass index, you eat a healthy diet, and you consume a moderate level of alcohol, your possibility of living far longer than the average Canadian, I can give you the number, but it's much, much higher. Okay? And basically he's saying, in my community, not a lot of people that can do all this stuff, right? But it's nobody's perfect, and we're not ready there. Let's just say this is sort of one standard. You did that, you're going to live longer, maybe a little bit healthier. Okay, let me take the other one. We as human beings tend to resist change a lot. Despite some of the things that were talked about today, you may think it's interesting, but that's not for me. I don't think I want to go down that path. So let me just introduce you to Alan Deutschman. Alan Deutschman here is a former journalist, prolific author. He's got creds, okay? In other words, 2007, He wrote this article in Fast Company called Change or Die. Okay? He actually started the article with those words, change or die. And he went on to say, what if you were given that choice? For real. What if it weren't just some rhetoric that says your lifestyle correlates with life and death? Not just some guy up on the stage or some motivational speaker in front of you dramatizing longevity and health span. No, we're talking actual life and death here now. Your own life and death. What if a well-informed, trusted authority figure said you had to make difficult and enduring changes in the way you think and act? If you didn't, your time would end very soon, a lot sooner than it had to. You change when change really matters. Yes, you say. Think again. Yes. Well, he comes back. He said, you're probably deluding yourself. You wouldn't change. Don't believe it? You want odds? Here are the odds. The scientifically studied odds. 9 to 1. That's 9 to 1 against you. There's a 10% chance when you're told to change or die, there's only a 10% chance that the majority of people will do it. Now, I don't want to end this on a model and note this. That was 2007. Deutschland continues to cite research that follows that. And we see this, our hospitals often tell us the same thing, that 80% of what each hospital budgets is consumed by the same 5 behavioral issues. The same 5 behavioral issues eating up 80% of a hospital budgets. What are those 5? Well, if you said Chernobyl or falling off a ladder, that's good, but that's not it. The 5 are the ones that we've talked about here today. They are the ones that are too much smoking, too much drinking, too much eating, too much stress, not enough exercise. Can we change? So here's the challenge and some good news. In our quest, I think, to thrive in retirement, are we willing to think a little bit more deeply about those objectives that you gave me at the beginning and some of the tactics that we can use to actually increase our longevity and our health span, irrespective of where we are in our particular level at these days? In a best-selling book, The Miracle Morning, an author, Hal Elrod, he said he's helped millions of people increase these odds away from the 10% up to a much higher level. He exhorts us to visualize the process of imagining exactly what it is we want to achieve. Those things that you said at the beginning, I want to do this. Visualizing this a little bit more carefully and then spending some time forcing yourself to act on those particular visions. So as my grandmother said, we can do this. All right, so I'm wrapping up for Ron here, and I'll just do this with a couple of quotes from people that you'll all recognize that I like. Aging's not lost youth, but a new stage of opportunity and strength. Betty Friedan. In the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years. Abraham Lincoln. And my all-time favorite, beautiful young people are accidents of nature, but beautiful old people are works of art. That's all us, right? Okay, folks, that's it. Thank you so much. Good.